Ahoy, and welcome to Q's Tattoos, where you come for the color, but leave with nothing but questions. Questions like, why did I get a tattoo? And I wonder how much this will cost to remove when I'm old and wrinkly. Well, I can't answer those questions for you, but I can teach you about the different lasers that you might use in your future practice to remove tattoos. And with that in mind, let's cover a few basics. In general, lasers function on a simple principle. The size of your target determines the thermal relaxation time, or time needed for the tissue to dissipate 50% of the heat, and the thermal relaxation time correlates to the pulse duration of the lasers that you want to use. Therefore, the smaller the target, the shorter the thermal relaxation time, and the shorter pulse duration that you need. For tattoos, the ink particles are particularly small, measuring around 0.1 micrometers, which is the smallest size that you'll target with a laser. Because of this, the thermal relaxation time is only about 10 nanoseconds, and thus the pulse duration that you want to use is about 1 to 10 nanoseconds. We don't have any particular hooks in the sketch to recall these numbers, but I like to remember it this way. If someone gets a tattoo, they probably only used about 0.1 brain cells in order to make that decision. And they probably spent 10 nanoseconds deciding which cartoon character to have permanently engraved into their skin. I know, that was a long intro, but it's all because I want you to understand that when you have such a short thermal relaxation time, you have to use what's called a quality switched, aka Q-switched laser, to achieve the correspondingly short pulse duration and high power. Hence the name of the tattoo parlor, Q's Tattoos. Alright, let's go get some ink. Oh, speaking of ink, Q's only uses neon ink. Why neon? Well, because that lip gloss is hip, that lip gloss is poppin'. Wait, that's Katy Perry. Well, anyways, it's actually because this neon wall will represent neodymium YAG, but not just any neodymium YAG, specifically frequency doubled neodymium YAG. To remind you of frequency doubled, just recall that neon ink is 2 times as colorful. Furthermore, to remove these colors, they're going to need at least 2 treatments, so use it as a bonus hook for that. You know what? This seems like a great time to tell a random story about me. Growing up, my favorite superhero was Superman. Maybe because he had great hair, or maybe just because I really liked my little t-shirt with a cape and a Superman symbol on the front. But then I found out that his weakness was a rock. Kryptonite. And I was just like, whoa, hold on. He can stop bullets, but a little rock defeats him? I'm jumping on the Aquaman wagon. Well, okay, I digress. I only mention this because the shape of the emblem behind the 2X reminds me of the Krypton symbol that I had tattooed on Superman would wear. That aside, you should know that neodymium YAG lasers have a 1064 nanometer wavelength. So, if you double the frequency, cut the wavelength in half. Thus, a frequency doubled neodymium YAG laser has a wavelength of 532 nanometers. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hang in there, Batman. What does this have to do with Superman? Well, recall that the emblem on Superman's chest was a symbol of Krypton, which is almost the same as the symbol on the wall. And this will serve as a reminder that a frequency doubled ND YAG has the same wavelength as a Krypton laser of 532 nanometers. Talk about a great story, huh? Now, shift your focus back to the artwork on the wall. Really appreciate the vibrant purples, blazing yellows, blinding whites, and majestic reds. Soak it all in. These are the colors that are particularly challenging to remove, but also the colors for which you would choose an ND YAG laser. However, maybe you're less of a color diva and you prefer the classics. And by classics, I of course mean you want some sweet ink of the Wizard of Oz. Outside of the super creepy flying monkeys, which still give me nightmares, the only other part of that movie that really stuck with me were the ruby slippers. Yeah, those ruby slippers. These ruby slippers will serve as our hook for the ruby laser, which has a wavelength of around 694 nanometers. Now, don't get your hopes up, we're not adding hooks for the wavelengths. But I will tell you that if you're choosing a ruby laser, you're probably trying to treat a green or black tattoo. So, just like the last wall, we've chosen cool artwork of the Emerald City on a black background to remind you that it's a particularly good laser for green and black tattoos. As a bonus, a random question that might come up on a test is what laser has classically been used to treat a nevus of Ota or Ito. In this case, a ruby laser would probably be the best answer, and while it's not entirely consistent with the theme, I think that the Eye of Sauron would actually make a nice addition to The Wizard of Oz, and it's a good reminder for nevus of Ota, which goes around the eye. Hey man, it's my body, my canvas. Alright, if you're not into Wizard of Oz, yeah, you're probably going to hate the next classic too. Alice in Wonderland. I mean, seriously, what were these people on back then? Alice will be our hook for Alexandrite lasers, which have an even longer wavelength of 755 nanometers and are best used for targeting black and green pigments. I know, I said ruby was good for green. Well, they both are, because their wavelengths are quite close together, hence why we've placed these two lasers on the same wall. However, if a test asks what laser is best to remove green pigment and gives you the choice of both, pick Alexandrite. Why? I don't know, just someone said so. Alright, now that we've covered the useful information, let's talk about some random facts that you're expected to know. The pigments that give these colors. We'll use the area in the center of the sketch to display hooks for the pigments, starting out with our tattoo artist. Now man, she looks the part, doesn't she? Look at that wild purple hair and manga-esque appearance. We've drawn her in a manga style to remind you of manganese, which is what's responsible for purple tattoo pigment, hence why she's wearing purple and has purple hair. Now, notice how the meathead that she's working on is rocking a red shirt with a cinnamon roll on it. Yeah, he's in the hot seat. The red shirt should remind you that we'll discuss red pigments in this area, and the cinnamon roll should remind you that he loves Cinnabon. Oh, and also that cinnabar is one of the pigments that's used to make a red pigment. Recall that this is the hot seat and the sign with a mercury thermometer on it to remind you that another name for cinnabar is mercury sulfide. Last, while not the most notable pigment and lower yield for the test, is cadmium selenide. Fun fact, cadmium is abbreviated as CD, which is just so perfect because we'll use a CD to remind you of cadmium, but in this case, it's cadmium selenide, and it's just so coincidental that Selena just happens to be the founder of Neon Ink. Okay, I know you're probably asking yourself why we would even include a low-yield pigment. Well, it's because we don't want you to get confused if you get a question asking what is responsible for yellow pigment and provides both cadmium sulfide and cadmium selenide as answer choices. For yellow pigment, it's cadmium sulfide. Don't worry though, just like this sulfide surfer guy, it's gonna be easy peasy, so just sit back and do less. Let the ridiculous, vibrant, all yellow soak into your eyeballs. I think a lot of people probably associate sulfur with yellow, but if you don't, that's why we chose a surfer. Furthermore, our surfer is a big fan of the band The Butthole Surfers, and is sporting a shirt with one of their CDs on it. Yeah, that's a real band, and yeah, they were kinda famous in the 80s. Again, remember that CD should remind you of cadmium, and the surfer should remind you of sulfide. Now, why is it that bad decisions usually come in pairs? It's like people think, hey, I got a tattoo. Might as well get some bling and grills, you know? Make sure no one takes me seriously. I guess it's just good business to sell bad decisions in bulk, because Q's Tattoos also sells some great chrome bling. Just look over there on the bright green counter, where they've got all the chrome that you need for your dome. The chrome on the green counter is to remind you that chromium oxide is used to make green pigment. The last pigment that we've included a hook for is blue, but I don't think it's all that helpful. With that in mind, I love to learn random facts to learn things and then tie it back to dermatology. For blue, you should know the pigment is cobalt, which may make sense to many of you because cobalt is often used as a color descriptor for expensive things like cars and phones. However, I find it more interesting that Asian cultures have been using blue pigment extensively in art dating back to the 1300s during the Yuan and early Ming dynasties. Let's continue with our Asian cultural theme and include a porcelain Chinese vase in the corner with cobalt blue designs. Yeah, I know. There's nothing that sounds like cobalt. Sorry. Now, before we wrap up, I just want to include a few quick tidbits that I think you're going to remember without a memory hook. White pigments include zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. Yeah, the same oxides that are in thick, white, pasty sunblock. Brown pigment is due to ochre. I was going to include an ogre, but I thought Shrek covered in mud would make this a little bit too busy. Alright, let's buzz through this and wrap it up. This scene takes place at Q's Tattoos because all of the lasers discussed here are used for tattoo removal, and because in order to target the small pigments of tattoos, you need to use a Q-switched laser. Which Q-switched lasers? The RAN lasers, because after you finished with them, the patients all ran. Recall RAN is an acronym for ruby, alexandrite, and neodymium YAG. Recall that the best laser for violet, red, yellow, and white is neodymium YAG, as shown with the wall on the left painted with these colors and having a display for neon ink for neodymium. Specifically, you need to use a frequency doubled ND YAG, which is the same wavelength as a krypton laser, 532 nanometers. This is shown with the 2x in a krypton looking symbol. You can also use this 2x to remember that they're going to need at least 2 treatments. The ruby slippers are to remind you of the ruby laser, which is particularly good for black and green pigments, which is shown with the Emerald City on the black background in this portion. However, recall that if you have to choose between ruby and alexandrite, alexandrite is better for green. Alexandrite is shown by Alice, and the brown and black background with green falling lines should remind you that it's used for black, brown, and green pigment. Our tattoo artist is drawn in manga style with matching purple hair and attire, and should remind you that manganese is used as a violet pigment. She's working on the meathead in the hot seat who has on a red shirt with a cinnamon roll on it. The cinnamon roll should remind you of cinnabar, while the hot seat sign with a mercury thermometer should remind you that another name for cinnabar is mercury sulfide. A less testable red pigment is cadmium selenide, as shown by the cadmium CD by Selena for cadmium selenide, also by the meathead. We included the Selena CD because we don't want you to get tripped up if you're asked about yellow pigment, which is due to cadmium sulfide. Recall that our surfer dude with his surfboard and wearing a shirt with a Butthole Surfers CD is to remind you that yellow pigment is cadmium sulfide. Green pigment is due to chromium oxide and is shown by all the chrome bling on the green counter on the right. I think that you'll remember cobalt because it's pretty commonly used as a color descriptor, but if you're a fan of random knowledge, you can recall that Chinese culture has used cobalt for hundreds of years to make the brilliant blue pigments in the iconic porcelain pottery. Of course, any of the lasers discussed in the sketch can be used to remove blue pigment. Last but not least, recall white is due to zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, just like sunblock, and brown is due to ochre. Just think of Shrek the Ogre rolling in mud. Hey, if you're enjoying the content, then don't forget to follow us on social media and share our YouTube videos with your friends. Alright, I'll catch you next time.